Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session on Dalit writing. In this lecture, we will continue with Module 2. This is part 2 of Module 2, and in this lecture, we will look at 3 more poems that has been prescribed for a detailed study in your curriculum. The first poem that we look at is Song by Poikayil Yohannan. The second poem would be The Poison Fruit by M.R. Renukumar. And the last poem that we'll discuss in this lecture is The Dream Teller by Pratibha Jayachandran. In the previous lecture, we discussed 3 poems, and all those 3 poems were symbols of resistance. A resistance to the sufferings and atrocities these Dalits have been undergoing for a very long period of time. And in today's lecture also, we'll be discussing 3 poems, and you'll see the same spirit of resistance alive throughout all these poems. So let's begin today's session with Poikayil Yohannan's poem titled Song. But before we move into the poem, we must first establish the context. Poikayil Yohannan lived between 1879 and 1939. If you observe closely, this was probably one of the most dynamic periods in the history of Kerala. Because during this time, a lot of traditions and customs were beginning to get questioned. This was the time of Renaissance in Kerala, led by none other than Sri Narayana Guru. Historically also, the time period is a significant one. The first elected legislature in the history of India came into being, Sri Moolam Popular Assembly or Sri Moolam Praja Sabha. It was founded in 1904. The aim was to maximize the participation of people in administration, but it wasn't a lawmaking body. Initially, the members were not elected. Instead, they were chosen, and mostly they were representatives of landlords and merchants. In the following years, however, they started having elected members, and the following years witnessed the assembly undergoing a lot of changes. Iyengali became the first Dalit to be elected to Sri Moolam Praja Sabha, followed by Poikayil Yohannan. Poikayil Yohannan was a Dalit activist, poet, and a social reformer born in Pathanamthitta district of Kerala. He was born in the Paraya community who served as slaves in prominent Christian households. At the age of 17, after being disappointed with the treatment he got because he was born into a Paraya community, he joined the Marthoma church, believing it to be a reformist church. Unfortunately, he was disappointed when he realized that the church too treated the Dalits badly, as inferior to them. He went on to join the Brethren mission, where again he faced discrimination. He understood the flaws in the belief system he was part of, and he decided to form one of his own, and thus was formed Pratyaksha Raksha Deva Sabha. He advocated for Dalit rights and their liberation through this movement. He urged his fellow brothers to give up superstitious practices like black magic and witchcraft, which they had been doing just because they were born into a particular lower caste. He was also a member of Sadhujana Paripalana Sangham started by the famous leader Iyengali. The poem you are about to study is the one that he presented before the Sri Moolam Praja Sabha. Now let's take a look at the poem titled Song. The poem Song has been translated from Malayalam, in which it is titled Poikayil Appachande Paatugal. The poem could be seen as a lament. The poet laments the fact that though the people of his community form an ancient race that made this land fertile through their hard work, nobody remembers them in history. There is nothing written about them. They are the mute witnesses that the history often forgets to mention. The poet himself belongs to a community that served as slaves, and he says that it is their blood and sweat that made this land fertile. But what do they get in return? When the poet says that there are histories, it's quite obvious that he is well aware of the existing parallel narratives on history. But at the same time, he is very much disappointed at the fact that there is not a single one that talks about the lives and sufferings of these indigenous people. Dalit writings are never part of the mainstream literature. He criticizes the Indian literary scene where nobody discusses Dalit issues. He says that these are elite people who are unaware of the condition of Dalits in the villages and different parts of the country. The poem reflects the despair in poet's mind. He wishes for history to chronicle their lives so that it stays as a proof of their lives filled with sufferings for the coming generations to know. But he laments the absence of any such history despite there being numerous parallel narratives. The poem therefore serves as a symbol of resistance when the poet decides to write their history on his own through his poetry. The poem is therefore a lament as well as a critique of a society that pretends to be elite by deriding the Dalit's existence. When the poem ends with the suicide of the boy and the girl, the reader is forced to think about a system that values certain beliefs above individuals. If you remember, we discussed a similar theme in the last lecture in the poem titled Identity Card by S. Joseph, where a girl and a boy falls in love, but their relationship comes to an end when the girl comes to know that the boy belongs to a lower caste from his identity card. It's high time we thought about it, and the beauty of the poem lies in making us think over the futility of such systems. The history hasn't acknowledged the suffering of Dalits. It has been insensitive to them like everyone else. One might even wonder if there is anything that can overcome this division in the name of caste and race. Can't love overcome this hatred in the name of caste? The next poem, titled The Poison Fruit by M.R. Renukumar, will tell you more about it. M.R. Renukumar is a painter poet from Kerala and has 3 collections of poems to his credit. Kenni Nilangalil, or The Marshy Land, which came out in 2005, Vishakaya, or The Fruit of Knowledge, published in 2007, Nala Classile Varal, or The Snakehead Fish in the 4th Standard, which came out in 2008. His contribution to the prose all include biography on Poikayil Yohannan and his translations of the graphic biography of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, titled Bhimayana, Experiences of Untouchability, which he translated from the English into Malayalam. The poem, The Poison Fruit, talks about the love life of a boy and a girl. They are neighbors and their parents great friends. They did everything together. Both their mothers worked together at times. Both their fathers are thick friends and spent a lot of time together. There was no scope of tragedy in these families. After all, they were leading peaceful, happy lives. But the boy and the girl commit suicide one fine day and their love life comes to an end. The parents are devastated by the loss. They remain shocked. Now, the beauty of the poem lies in its open endedness. Not even once does the poet hint at a reason or leave behind a clue behind the lover's suicide. The reader is suddenly left all alone to discover the cause. However, the only possibility the reader can think of is the caste system, the social evil that comes into play in relationships. In a country where young men and women are brutally murdered just because they got married into different castes or a person of their choice, only caste can be the greatest enemy here. Moving on to the last poem in this lecture, titled Dream Teller by Pratibha Jayachandran. Have you ever thought how hard, how difficult it is to be someone who has to suffer from unfair treatment just because he was born into a lower caste? Have you ever thought if they too had dreams? Pratibha Jayachandran's Dream Teller is about the dreams and aspirations of Dalits which remain unfulfilled because of their caste. So that's the next poem we will discuss. Pratibha Jayachandran is a Tamil poet and a short story writer. Though he was born into a lower caste and was mistreated initially, his education saved him. Later, he moved to Pondicherry, where he founded a magazine along with like minded people.
And the magazine served as a platform to discuss Dalit issues because he considers Dalit writing as a separate genre and a strong one at that. His poetry collection came out in 1985 and it is titled Pustahathilirundu Purappetta Pradimagal, and the translation would be Images Sprouting from the Book of Life. The poem is a translation of the Tamil work titled Kanavugal Solpavan, that is, Dream Teller, and talks about the dreams and aspirations of the Dalits. In the poem, he talks about the urge in a Dalit to produce something creative. As he says, words fondly lie side by side. They might want to write, they might have been nurturing words within them for a lifetime, but they can never let it come out for the fear of being a lowborn. They are denied opportunities. They are denied access to sources of knowledge. They are not allowed to think on their own. How do you expect them to progress in life? Dalits are also humans. They too have dreams. Their dreams and footprints lay embedded, waiting for an opportunity. The poems could be seen as the poet's wish to see Dalit writing emerge as a mainstream literature. His whole idea behind starting a magazine was also the same, to provide a platform to discuss Dalit issues and to promote Dalit writings. He believes that the Dalits will spontaneously respond to such opportunities because they've been denied all these opportunities for centuries. As the poem draws to a close, the poet dreams of a space where their creativity receives recognition. And he becomes the dream teller who voices his dream of liberation and freedom for all Dalits. And that's how the poem comes to a close. But before we wrap up, let's take a minute to think. Imagine we being the largest democracy in the world where the constitution guarantees right to freedom of expression to every single citizen. We need to stand and think twice. Are these rights, or all the rights that the constitution guarantees, being given to every citizen? Does every citizen enjoy the same kind of rights? If so, are they being implemented in the right way? And this is the basic premise on which Dalit writing stands on. It is here to claim its lost space. As the famous Dalit writer Valmiki said, Dalit literary movement is not just a literary movement. It is also like a cultural and social movement. Dalit society has been imprisoned for 1,000 years in the dark mist of ignorance, deprived of knowledge. Dalit literature is the portrayal of the wishes and aspirations of those oppressed and fermented Dalits. Thus, we come to the end of part 2 of module 2. But before we end, let's quickly revisit the important points that we discussed and all the 3 poems that we discussed in this lecture. We started off with Poikayil Johannan's poem titled Song. Poikayil, and we discussed the significance of the writer, the poet Poikayil Yohannan. He belonged to the Renaissance age in the history of Kerala, and we also discussed the main theme in running throughout the poem. He speaks about the absence of historical narratives that describes the people belonging to lower caste. The poet is disappointed at the fact that despite there being a number of parallel historical narratives, there is not a single one that describes the sufferings and the lives of the Dalits. So the poem could be seen as a lament or a critique on the existing narratives as well as on those who write history. Then we moved on to M.R. Renukumar's poem, The Poison Fruit, that tells the story about a boy and a girl who were in love with each other but commit suicide. The significance of the poem lies in the way it is written because nowhere in the poem it leaves a clue or gives a hint at the reason behind the suicide, but the reader is forced to think on his own, and we rather arrive at the conclusion that it might have been an intercaste relationship that might have ended in a suicide. Again, the caste politics that comes into play even in matters of love is the focus in this poem. And then the last poem that we discussed in the lecture was Pratibha Jayachandran's Dream Teller, where the poet again requests or he laments that Dalit writings be viewed with equal significance like the mainstream literature. He wants Dalit people to come up with their own writings because they have been the people who have suffered throughout. He goes on to say that Dalits are also humans. They also have aspirations and dreams. And the poet himself comes out as the dream teller who voices the dreams of these Dalits and who dreams of the liberation and freedom of Dalits one day. So that was the last poem that we discussed. And as I mentioned, always, if you have any need any clarifications or if you have any doubts, please comment below. We'll meet with the next lecture. Thank you.